The date was May the 28th, 2024, and on a warm summer evening, armed cops infiltrated the London home of Nasen Saadi, who was currently wanted under suspicion of one of Bournemouth's most horrific murders. Investigators had spent many hours trying to track him down, which luckily was made easier due to the mountain of surveillance footage they had found nearby. But the peculiar thing here is that the more you look into this story, the more foreboding it becomes. Because in the weeks, months, and even years leading up to Amy's murder, there were many glaring red flags. And if that wasn't enough already, this was all committed by a criminology student who was fascinated by true crime and could not settle for mere theory. You see, this man at least believed that he could commit the perfect murder. But the question is, did he? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're traveling to the southern coast of England to look at the case of Nasen Saadi and Amy Gray. So, why did a supposedly intelligent student decide to commit such a senseless act of murder? Why and how did he choose Amy and Leanne? And what did the police uncover? Today, we'll answer all of these questions, but before we begin, please do consider subscribing if you like true crime, strange, or chilling stories. Thank you. And now with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. It was on the evening of May the 24th, 2024 that everything would change for Leanne and Amy. Two friends, that being 34-year-old Amy Gray and 38-year-old Leanne Miles, had chosen Dirty Chine Beach as the perfect spot to catch up after a busy week of work. This hidden gem is cradled by the Westcliff Gardens, which offers a quiet and serene escape. It is close enough to feel the pulse of the city, yet just far enough away to feel completely cut off from everything and everyone else. As the evening began to stretch out, Amy and Leanne sat close to a small fire together, its flickering flames casting a warm glow as they chatted and laughed under the full moon. Quite understandably, the beach they were on, which is well known for its peacefulness, felt like the perfect place for an overdue catch-up. However, unknown to them at the time, evilness watched them from the shadows, and their presence had caught the eye of someone with the darkest of intentions. As seen here on the surveillance footage, Amy and Leanne can be seen sitting peacefully by the fire, completely unaware of the danger that was carefully watching them. In the background, a dark figure can be seen lingering on the promenade, watching both women for several tense moments. We will break down the extended surveillance footage in a short while, but for now, it is worth noting here that, after scoping out the rest of the area, he made his move. The man approached without warning, both silent and calculated, before then coldly launching a brutal attack. Over the next few seconds, Leanne was stabbed more than a dozen times in a frenzy of violence. Meanwhile, in a desperate bid to save her friend, Amy yelled at the attacker to back off. Surprisingly, her distraction actually worked, and Leanne then managed to escape. However, tragically, that act of bravery would cost Amy dearly. She had now become the assailant's new target, and that is when the figure turned and then jumped on her instead, unleashing a savage assault. As a result, Amy suffered almost a dozen stab wounds too, one of them delivering such a force that it pierced her heart. Despite her catastrophic injuries, Leanne somehow managed to flee the promenade, and at 11:42 p.m, she placed a desperate call to 999, urgently pleading for their assistance as soon as possible. Paramedics were dispatched immediately, but to make matters even worse, their access to the beach was ultimately delayed. A locked gate blocked the way, and it wasn't until police arrived and then forcibly cut the gate down that they could finally reach the crime scene. And what they found next was harrowing. Amy had suffered catastrophic injuries, which tragically were beyond saving. The paramedics desperately tried to perform CPR on her, but sadly, it was all too late, and Amy Gray was pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, Leanne was urgently rushed to the hospital after suffering a collapsed lung and a punctured liver, but miraculously and thankfully, she would survive. As the sun rose over the coastal town of Bournemouth, its residents woke up to the tragic news of a terrible stabbing. Now, although Bournemouth is a town which is well known for its safety and is famed for its 7 miles of beaches, it had all of a sudden become the epicenter of an awful tragedy. Not only that, but Amy's death marked another blow to England's rising knife crime, And with Bournemouth being so dependent on tourism, many began to wonder how it would affect its local economy. Which, by the way, is not important in this story. However, what it does highlight is how one murder can affect an entire population. At the time of her death, Amy Gray was 34 years old. Her mother, Sharon, described her as an amazing, funny, kind and energetic soul, and as often as we hear this, someone whose laughter could light up any room. Amy was married to a woman named Sian Gray, and together they adopted a young daughter who grew up beside them. Sian remembers her as the most loving wife and mother, with a giggly laugh and a radiant smile. She was the kind of woman who had unwavering devotion and tried to balance her career with the many responsibilities of motherhood. Professionally, Amy was a well-respected personal trainer and also served as the head coach of the Dorset futsal ladies team, where she was named to be Clubwoman of the Year. She also shared a deep friendship with Leanne, who was only a few years older than her and came from the nearby town of Poole. Although not much is known about Leanne's private life, the two had chosen to spend a quiet evening together by the beach, which at the time was a peaceful moment, but tragically would be their last one together. In the hours that followed the attack, Dorset police launched an official investigation to try to determine who murdered Amy and who injured Leanne. More than 100 police officers were deployed to the area that morning, where they searched the beach, promenade and all nearby areas. But of course, with this being a beach, any small detail could be easily missed. It is at this stage that the police force split up, sending one team to examine the crime scene while the other looked for any possible witnesses. And as part of standard procedure, investigators immediately turned to all surveillance cameras in the area, which included hotels, shops, and council-owned cameras along the beachfront. Now, thankfully, the area was littered with cameras and gave detectives a good ending point and the ability to work backwards. And what they found was terrifying. Now, we will explore these clips into more detail shortly, but after reviewing hours of footage from the beach and its surrounding streets, detectives didn't find just one, but several sightings. Multiple videos, which all seemed to capture the suspect's movements before, during, and even after the murder of Amy Gray. And the more they found out about him, well, let's just say that his behavior stood out like blood under luminol. So, I'm sure the questions on your mind right now are, who is this man? How did he know Amy and Leanne? And where did he go? Well, let's first look at what else the officers found. Almost like a game of reverse dominoes, police would manage to trace their suspect back to the camera in this building's lobby. Seen within this footage was a young man in a hood and dark clothing. He was then seen on the promenade roughly 25 minutes later at 11:05 p.m, where he was then seen moving with deliberate pace along the shoreline. His movements did seem to stand out to officers, who also noted that he appeared to be alone and avoided the main routes. Another surveillance camera watched him lingering around the beachfront for a rather suspicious amount of time. It was strange because he wasn't jogging, sightseeing, or talking to a friend. He was merely watching and waiting for someone. In a crucial step to identify the suspect, Dorset police released still images pulled from surveillance footage and issued a public appeal. The detective superintendent named Richard Dixie urged anyone who recognized the man to come forward, while issuing a very clear warning to the public. Do not approach this man under any circumstances. The release of those images would mark a major turning point in the investigation, as soon enough, dozens of leads began to pour in from the public. Meanwhile, detectives were hard at work trying to track the suspect's movements, and they had found him across a network of surveillance feeds. The trail led them away from the beach and then into the West Hill Road area of Bournemouth, where the man was then captured on camera entering a small convenience store. Inside, he made a purchase using a bank card, and that moment, as brief as it was, proved to be critical. Investigators were then able to swiftly trace the card back to its owner, and that is when they came across the name of Nasen Saadi, who, surprisingly, was a 20-year-old criminology student living in Croydon. This was another pivotal moment for the investigators. The anonymous enigma behind Amy's killer had now finally shattered, and the investigators could now focus their attention on someone instead of something. However, there would be many more shocking details which were still to be found, some of them even making this case extraordinarily unique. But before we get to that, who precisely was Nasen Saadi, and what drove him to carry out such a violent, merciless attack? Diving into his background, Nasen was born in Thailand on December the 22nd, 2003. He eventually moved to the UK with his parents when he was only 4 years old, where the family ultimately settled in Purley in South London. From here on out, his family would establish their own fruit import business, which by all means seemed to be rather fruitful for them, no pun intended. As for Nasen, he went on to attend Selsdon Primary School and then later Riddlesdown Collegiate. While at Riddlesdown, he studied beet export between 2020 and 2022, suggesting that he had an early interest in athletics and physical education. Teachers described him as a very quiet and serious student. He wasn't exactly a social butterfly, but at least he was well known for keeping his head down and getting on with his work. Refocusing on his family, his background was actually quite mixed and unique, where one of his parents was from Iraq and the other from Thailand. His grandfather once described him as a clever young man who liked to think things through and plan carefully. But despite those traits, Nasen did not seem to click with many people. He only had a few friends while growing up and reportedly would often struggle with rejection, especially when coming from girls at his school. And so eventually, like many other people out there, Nasen then turned to the internet for friendship and connection. Under the usernames of nskills and Ninja Killer, he then began to post in forums about criminal behavior alongside infamous UK murder cases. But going one step further, it was not only the criminals that fascinated him, but also the way in which they were caught. He often focused on how police investigations unfolded and what mistakes the killers made which led to their arrests. It became clear over time that Nasen was developing an obsessional fascination with violence, horror, crime, and the mind of those who kill. And it also seemed that he was harboring a deep-seated urge for revenge against society. As Nasen's interest deepened, his obsession took a darker turn, and through this fascination, he purchased 2 knives and an axe online. But of course, with him still living with his parents, they would eventually find these weapons in his bedroom. And let me tell you, when they did, they apparently freaked out. Now, quite understandably, this incident caused a lot of friction between them. His mum and dad had no idea why their son needed an axe in the family home. I think the reason's quite obvious, really. There is none, and so they decided to confiscate them from him. By now, Nasen was becoming more strange, hostile, and argumentative, and following this rather explosive argument with his parents, he decided to move out, opting to live with his grandfather and aunt instead. And with his family now broken up, it seemed that his trajectory would only get worse from here on out. Despite the shakeup, Nasen persevered with his education, and in the autumn of 2023, he enrolled at the University of Greenwich, where he switched from a physical education degree to criminology. While there, he seemed to be academically engaged, but saying that, his behavior did also seem to start raising eyebrows. Many lecturers recall him asking unusually detailed questions about strange things like forensic procedures, investigative loopholes, and how suspects avoid being traced. One tutor would even joke, "You're not planning a murder now, are you?" Yeah, I bet he regrets that comment now. But beneath the humor, there was something rather unsettling here. You see, Nasen had been doing extensive research in not only how to carry out, but also conceal a violent crime. It was no longer just an interest of his, it was a desire. And all of this began to look more like a preparation than anything else. Only a few months later, in February of 2024, and only halfway through his first year, Nasen then became the subject of a formal stalking complaint. The details were never made public. However, it was serious enough for the police to launch their own investigation on him. And this wasn't the first time his behavior had concerned people either. Some who knew him described him as smart but intense, aware but isolated, and at times even unnerving. By the way, for the sake of mental health and psychology in true crime, it is worth noting here that, although no formal health diagnosis was identified in Nasen, psychological assessments did note there were features of autistic spectrum disorder. It is also extremely essential to recognize here that ASD does not inherently lead to violent behavior, but these traits may explain why he was rather unsociable with other people. Either way, Nasen had already made his mind up. He wanted to murder someone and was confident that he could even get away with it too. By the early months of 2024, Nasen began his research into Bournemouth, more specifically the Westcliff area, and you could say that his searches were not so much about hotels or tourist hotspots. They were more targeted. His research was quite suspicious actually, and he pulled up maps of the promenade, looked at areas where there were less surveillance cameras, and even googled if it was harder to run on sand or pebbles. And if that wasn't strange enough already, he would also look for hotels that were near the beach but didn't have any surveillance cameras, and would even browse forums looking for blind spots. He would also make rather specific searches, googling things like how long does surveillance footage last on a camera, and how to move without being seen by a camera. And the most chilling question of them all, why is it harder to catch a killer if he does it in another town? In the weeks that followed, Nasen made several quiet trips from Croydon down to Bournemouth. He would book a room and stay a night or two, spending most of his evenings walking up and down the promenade alone. If that wasn't strange enough already, he would spend most of his time there just watching, observing and calculating. And every time he visited Bournemouth, he would head home without telling anyone where he had been. And in late May of 2024, he would book what would be his final trip down to Bournemouth. So, let's walk through the timeline. On the morning of Tuesday the 21st of May 2024, it was just a regular day in Croydon. But for Nasen Saadi, it marked the beginning of something far more sinister. With a backpack over his shoulder and a train ticket in his hand, he boarded a train down to Bournemouth. He had preemptively booked 4 nights at a travel lodge under his real name. He arrived in Bournemouth beneath grey skies, and over the next 3 days, surveillance cameras along the promenade in Westcliff and the lower gardens would quietly follow him around. No one noticed him back then, but of course they would later. These cameras would record him walking with purpose, sometimes stopping, sometimes pacing, but always alone. Other surveillance footage would show him inspecting beach access paths, observing how crowded certain areas became, and most notably, mapping out the positions of CCTV cameras. He was seen circling Durley Chine, which of course is one of the quieter, more tucked away parts of the beach. His outfit was always the same, dark clothes, hood up and head down. And although this outfit was rather ominous looking, he didn't raise any alarm. But he wasn't exactly invisible either. On the evening of May the 22nd, Nasen travelled to a local cinema, where he then purchased a ticket for The Strangers Chapter 1. For those of you who don't know, it's a reboot of a cult horror film where masked attackers carry out senseless killings. In hindsight, this is a very chilling detail. It's kind of like he watched this film for motivation. And then, only 2 days later, on Friday the 24th of May, he would carry out the unthinkable. It was shortly before sunset that he would leave his hotel and then head towards the promenade. In this surveillance clip, you can see him once again walking alone, heading west towards the darker, quieter edge of the beach. On that very night, and only a mere few meters away, Amy Gray and Leanne Miles were sitting by a small fire on Durley Chine Beach. It was peaceful and tucked away, and the cove was quiet at night. They were laughing, talking, and enjoying the sound of waves. But unbeknownst to them at the time, Nasen was watching from the shadows. Nasen was silent and there was no warning. He approached them quietly and then he attacked. As we already know, he lunged first at Leanne, stabbing her multiple times in the process. Witnessing it all, Amy tried to fight him off. She shouted and pushed Nasen as she tried to protect her friend. But tragically, that made her his next target. That is when he turned on Amy and stabbed her 10 times in the process, which, as we know, one of those wounds piercing her heart. Despite everything, Leanne scrambled to the promenade and then called 999. Her voice, barely coherent, was soaked in panic and pain. Emergency services then rushed to the scene, but sadly, it was all too late for Amy, who, right there on the sand, was pronounced dead. And although Leanne would ultimately survive, she was in terrible condition. And as for Nasen Saadi, well, for now, he had vanished. What we would later find out through surveillance footage is that Nasen walked away from the crime scene in the same direction he had arrived. He then got rid of his clothes, discarded the knife, and kept quiet. The following morning, he travelled back to Croydon via train as if nothing had happened. But, of course, the town he had left behind was now reeling in shock. It was only 4 days later, on May the 28th, 2024, that at approximately 8 p.m, officers would arrive at Nasen's semi-detached residence in Purley, South London. And this body cam footage captures the very moment he was arrested.
To the head! Walk down the stairs! Slowly! Keep walking! Keep walking! Stop! Turn around! Walk backwards! Hands ahead! Walk backwards towards my voice! Walk backwards! Keep walking!
Yeah,
Keep walking!
Space.
Bring him out. Out, come out! Get on your knees! Down on your knees! Down on your knees!
Look at me.
Stay there, do not move.
Explain all of it. Focus on me.
I've seen you're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
As you can see, they detained him without any incident, and Nasen went down with compliance and cooperation. He was then informed of his arrest on suspicion of murder and attempted murder, before then being transported to a South London police station, where extensive questioning would begin. Later on, detectives would find several knives in his bedroom, some of which seemed to be concealed behind a wall and a wardrobe. In addition to this, they would also find some self-defense spray. After linking Nasen to the crime and then arresting him, detectives then turned their attention to his digital footprint. Now, although he refused to give officers the passcode to his phone, that didn't stop them, because basically he had shared all of his information between his devices, and so after looking at his computer, well, yeah, what they found was very disturbing. And he was incredibly not subtle either. I mean, honestly, he may as well have just googled how to murder someone on Bournemouth Beach and get away with it. I mean, let's just break this down for a second, okay? He booked a hotel under his name, used his credit card under his name, and then made dozens of suspicious Google searches, and didn't clear his browser history. And let's not forget here, but he was so obvious with his questions to his lecturers that some of them even joked if he was planning a murder. So, was this really a calculated attempt at the perfect crime, or was this more an attempt at being the perfect idiot suspect? I'll let you decide. Anyway, once the police had all of this information, they began to layer everything together. They overlaid his movements through surveillance cameras alongside the timeline of the 999 call and the path that Leanne took as she ran for help. Combine that with the forensic evidence and the data available, and detectives were then able to build a precise timeline, one that placed Nasen at the scene of the murder exactly when it happened, and even caught him slipping away in the hours that followed. During the interrogations, Nasen denied any involvement whatsoever, and although he did acknowledge being in Bournemouth at the time, he claimed to have had no recollection of the events in question. He would also try to suggest that he had been wrongly accused here and had blacked out from alcohol.
From the start we've said this is about us getting answers, finding the truth, yeah? There's lots of things here that indicate that you are the person responsible.
And I'm not responsible.
Okay.
And I have no reason to attack someone for no reason.
Is there something else going on that will be an explanation as to what's then happened?
No comment.
Your interests?
That's related to my university. So
Your views towards females?
No comment.
So now I think we are getting to the point where, do you think there's anything we've not talked about or asked you about that's important that you need to tell us?
I'm just saying I'm wrongly accused of mistaken identity.
Okay.
And mistakes can happen. And I'm just not responsible.
Okay. Is there anything you think we haven't understood?
I think just because someone is wearing the same clothes is circumstantial.
Are you prepared to tell us things like where the clothing is that you were wearing that night?
No comment.
What we've seen you wearing on the previous nights?
No comment.
The rest of your belongings or possessions are?
No comment.
And crucially where you were, because it's a very quick inquiry to confirm where you were, to prove or disprove whether you were the person we're saying has moved along the beach and done this attack.
Well, I left Bournemouth on the 25th on like 9 o'clock,
Yeah, we know that, but we're just trying to establish where you were between 11 and midnight.
No comment.
I think what's preventing you is the fact that, as the evidence shows, you are the male that is responsible for the murder and an attempted murder. You were on the beach that night.
But beaches are like popular places. Many people on the CCTV that you showed me. There were many like people walking. It's not just one person.
Is there anything else you can tell us about what else you were doing on the 24th and 25th?
Well, I was back home on the 25th, but I can't remember anything after.
After what?
I got home.
Okay. But yesterday you couldn't remember anything after the beach at Thursday afternoon?
No.
In that case, is there anything from anyone else? Sure there's nothing you want to add or clarify? In that case, it is 16:25. The interview is concluded and we are turning the recorder off.
In addition to this, Nasen also admitted to harbouring a keen interest in true crime and forensic methodologies. He also revealed that not only had he been studying criminology, but he had also engaged in extensive research. Psychologically speaking, Nasen's demeanour was both cold and detached throughout questioning. He also showed no sign of remorse or emotion, even when officers laid out the horrific details. His answers seemed to be short and clipped, and when things got uncomfortable, he leaned heavily on his right to remain silent. And even still, he would stick to his claim that all of this was a case of mistaken identity. But based off of this surveillance footage, yeah, sure Nasen, if you say so. After his arrest and his initial interrogation, Nasen Saadi was formally charged with the murder of Amy Gray and the attempted murder of Leanne Miles. Over the following weeks, additional hearings were held to deal with the preliminary matters and to set a date for the trial. But even while awaiting trial, Nasen would continue to show exactly what kind of person he was. Reports began to surface that, apparently, he had made inappropriate comments to a female officer, not only asking her how much media attention the case was getting, but then even beginning to touch himself in front of her. So, just when you think that he couldn't be even more of a creep, he just has to go and prove you wrong. Moving forward, Nasen's trial commenced in December of 2024 at Winchester Crown Court. The prosecution presented extensive evidence, including surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and digital records to demonstrate his premeditation and culpability. The court would hear how Nasen had conducted extensive research on committing crimes in unfamiliar towns. The investigation would also reveal his misogynistic attitudes, his resentment towards women, and his fascination with knives and weapons. Of course, it would also highlight his obsession with violent crimes and his former stalking allegations. The judge would also go on to comment on his behaviour by saying, quote, "It seems that you have felt humiliated and embarrassed by repeated rejections or perceived rejections of any advances you have made, particularly towards girls, which, over time, has resulted in deeply suppressed rage directed towards society and women in particular." Despite the overwhelming evidence available, Nasen decided to deny these charges and plead not guilty. However, on December the 18th, 2024, the jury officially found him guilty of murder and attempted murder. Now, surprisingly, the judge would actually delay his sentencing to allow time for a psychiatric report to be prepared, but ultimately, this would not end in his favour. The assessment would conclude that although Nasen did exhibit traits associated with autism, he was not diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Instead, it highlighted his obsession with violence, a sense of grievance, and his desire to feel ultimately powerful. Now, naturally, the court considered all of these findings before his sentencing, and thankfully, this would do nothing to shave any time off for him. And so, on March the 28th, 2025, the judge sentenced him to life in prison, with a minimum of 39 years behind bars.
Prior to your conviction, you gave no account or explanation for your actions. You made no comment in interview with the police and did not give evidence at your trial, where you were convicted on overwhelming evidence. You admitted your guilt for the first time to Dr. Rothenberg, a psychiatrist who has prepared a report at the court's request for your sentence. You clearly should have pleaded guilty to these offences, avoiding the need for Miss Miles and the families of your victims to go through the stress of a trial. Your refusal to do so shows not only a complete lack of remorse, but in my view also that you sought the notoriety you hoped a trial would give you. Even now, you have not told the truth. I reject the account that you gave to Dr. Ruthenberg of going to Bournemouth for a holiday, walking late on the promenade because you didn't like crowds, and committing the murder on impulse. As I have said, the clear evidence is that you planned to kill and went to Bournemouth to do so. Nasen Saadi, for the murder of Amy Gray, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum term of 39 years and 64 days. Thereafter, it will be for the parole board to decide when, if ever, you should be released. If you are ever released, you will remain on licence for the rest of your life. For the attempted murder of Leanne Miles, the concurrent sentence is 30 years imprisonment. For the offence of failing to comply with a notice requiring disclosure, the sentence is one of 21 months in concurrent. The total sentence is therefore one of life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 39 years and 64 days. The statutory surcharge can be drawn up in the appropriate amount. Go down.
The loss of Amy Gray has had a profound and lasting impact on her loved ones and completely changed the fabric of their daily lives. For her wife and their young daughter, the world has become an unfamiliar place, one which is now filled with everlasting sorrow. Amy was not only a wife and a mother, but also a vibrant and well-loved figure in her community. Her energy, kindness, and unmistakable personality had a way of instantly drawing people in. Her mother, Sharon, reminisced about her daughter's vibrant personality, saying, "Amy was an amazing, funny, kind, and energetic soul. She had a big smile and a loud laugh, and when she entered the room, it filled with laughter, and her presence couldn't be ignored. Since Amy was taken from us, it is like the lights have been dimmed and we cannot get the power to go back up." Alongside her family and friends, Bournemouth responded with both grief and solidarity. The beach where Amy had lost her life quickly became a place of tributes with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Locals were shaken by the senselessness of what had happened, and the town mourned together. As for Leanne, her survival is nothing short of remarkable, and despite suffering many stab wounds, she managed to escape and then call emergency services. And that act alone likely saved her. It is noted that both the police and the community praised her strength. But in the courtroom, Leanne decided to make a quiet yet powerful decision, ultimately deciding to decline to give a victim impact statement. This was on the basis that she didn't want Nasen to gain any insight into her mind or emotions. And what better way to keep him from knowing by just merely remaining silent? And as for Nasen, well, for what he did, he is now serving a minimum of 39 years behind bars. It is reported that, apparently, he has finally begun to acknowledge his guilt. But even so, many questions still remain about whether he is truly capable of change. During his sentencing, the judge described him as an extremely dangerous young man, and one who is likely to remain a threat for many years to come. And, sadly, the damage has already been done. You see, Nasen has to be one of the worst types of killers out there, the kind that just murders for absolutely no reason at all. There was no real motive, he didn't know Amy or Leanne, and there was nothing to gain from this. All he wanted to know was what murder felt like, and that is pure evil. To make matters worse, this kind of story is what stops people, more specifically women, from being out after dark. I mean, all these two were doing was enjoying time together on the beach. It really shouldn't be a problem. He's the kind of guy that I hope never gets out of prison, and quite honestly, I hope he rots behind bars. Anyway, that's my opinion, as nonchalant as it may be, and on that note, what are your thoughts? As always, please share yours in the comments down below. I can see my camera is just about to die, and so on that note, I'm gonna wrap this video up here today. Thank you so much for watching, folks, and as always, I'll see you again very, very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, please do remember to look after yourselves and, of course, each other. And stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.